Alright, so this is the connector for, you know, the whole reason I'm pulling out this transmission. So this top right pin, the next one over, and I'm just looking at it now, it looks like maybe even the third one has corrosion in it. Now, this one looks like there's some tabs here on the side. Yep. Alright, so in this case, this little pry point right there is not the point of release. These tabs on the side. There it goes. Alright, completely popped apart. So now, oh yeah, these first three pins are definitely corroded. Now, unfortunately, it looks like they're corroded beyond repair or beyond use. And it looks like the corrosion was actually starting to spread to the entire top row and this pin right here. So the rest of these I think can be cleaned. Even this third one may be able to be cleaned. But I'm going to go ahead and pull this first one out and see exactly how bad it really is. So let's see, there's some grime right there. Alright, to get these out, on the bottom there's these little tangs right here. You can see, you might be able to see these easier because they're clean. You get to this guy and this guy, and they're the corrosion has made them very dirty. So you want a very small pick tool, and you're just pushing down. Now these actually have a nice little ledge off to the side to make it easier to push them down. Some of these connectors do not. So when you're doing that, you also want to be on the back of the connector with your other hand, with the wire right there, and put a little tension. Don't put any tension on the wire initially. So you're just you know, prepping to pull. And then as soon as you put pressure on that tang, then you can start pulling. And since there's corrosion on this, it's probably going to be a tough one coming out. So I'm going to do a test pull on a different pin, just to see if I can get an idea of how difficult these pins should come out. How difficult it should be to get these pins out. Pushing the tang down. Oh, actually, this one, you know what? I think this is the actual lock. This is the second lock. Yep, there it is. Okay, so learning these newer connectors. This one actually has two locks. So this is why it just this is why it was giving me trouble pulling that pin out, because this white piece, which I think is what that symbol was actually pointing to, was this is another lock for these guys. So the first cover, or the black cover, was probably just to protect these tangs and to keep things, you know, from dislodging them, and then this is the actual pull-out protection. So I'm going to go back to that first pin that we were working on. Well, this one's actually coming through. Weird. Oh yeah. Alright, so the first wire was blue, the second wire was white. The second wire that we pulled, which would have been pins 8, would have been blue, pin 7 would have been white. That one is really bad. I mean, look at that. The corrosion is just pulled all the way up into the seal, the wire seal. That's so bizarre. I've never seen anything like that, at least on something this modern. Alright, so the next wire, pin 6, is green with a white stripe. Okay, that one was tough coming out too. Shoo. That is crazy. So it looks like, you know what, I'm betting these wire seals aren't doing their job, and they're letting moisture in from the top, and that's what, and then the water is coming down and sitting on the terminal here, and it's rotting the terminals. I'm willing to bet, because this connector, the orientation of this connector is, you know, this way, so any moisture, any water that would get up on this from driving in the rain would just sit right on top. And if these seals are a little little if they shrink any or they deform, then you're losing all protection from the environment. So here are the terminals and seals for the shift solenoid connector on the side of the transmission. I wasn't too sure on what size wire that is on the harness, so I ordered 2 different size terminals and their associated seals. So these all came from a company called Corsa, and there's our part numbers. So once I figure out the correct size, I'll put that in the description so you have a direct link, or at least the part number, if not a direct link. Alright, so the angles that I got to work with here aren't going to be perfect for showing you exactly every step of the way of this process, but I will go over the idea here. So we've got corrosion, coming up this connector, or coming up this terminal. So I would love to just be able to cut these connectors, or sorry, these terminals off right at the seal, right there. And then that'll allow me to put a new seal and terminal on and not have to do a repair farther up into the harness, because there should be enough slack here. You can see the connector comes down past the bottom of the bulkhead here. So there should be enough slack in the harness to do a repair right on the end of this wire. Now the only issue is that if this corrosion has leached farther up into the wire, let's say, up to here, then I'm going to have to cut, another inch or 2, maybe even more, farther into the harness to do this repair. So ideally, we just want to cut right there, where that occurs. Alright, so now I'm going to attempt to pull the seal off. That one came off nice and easy. Alright, so just my initial visual inspection, it looks like clean copper there. So I'm going to go ahead and try to strip this back a little bit. Okay. That looks pretty darn clean. Alright, out of the 2 wire seals that I have, it's definitely not the green ones, those are too small. And really, these purple ones might be a little too small. But I think they'll work. Yeah. So all I did was just slid this seal over, and then once it gets over the insulation, that's when it stops. So the seal stops right when the insulation stops. So on this one, you see the insulation stops and then copper. That's where the seal wants to stop. You don't want this wire seal to be over top of the copper, because then the crimp won't actually grab the copper. Alright, so as for the terminals, same thing. The smaller of the 2 appeared to be a little too small. So the things that change is this part that actually crimps the copper, and eventually the part that crimps the seal, they get taller. And I don't think in this series they would get much wider, but I know they get taller to accommodate that thicker or more dense copper with a thicker wire. So these come on these little production rails that are meant to go into an auto crimper. But we just need to take a pair of dikes and snip these off. You don't want to just bend it off like this, because you'd be left with a little bit of a flag there, and that could damage insulation, or it may not actually go into the connector. Alright, so there we go. There's a single terminal. Now, this will sit right on top of the copper and the insulation. And if the copper isn't long enough, you'll want to go back and just trim a little bit more of the insulation, so so that the copper just barely protrudes past the flags, or these tangs of the crimp. And then it's just a matter of bringing the crimp tool and figuring out which one works best here. I mean, they will all crimp this terminal, but it's just a matter of which one will crimp it the most efficiently and give a good result at the end that doesn't have a pull-out condition. That's the most important thing about doing a wire repair like this, is that you don't want to put this terminal back in and then upon applying a little bit of pressure have it just pull out of that terminal, having the wire pull out of the terminal. That's not a good, you won't have a good day if that's happening. Trying to fish those terminals out of some of these connectors can be hell. Alright, so I'm gonna see which one works, and then we'll jump to the next, and then I'll just wrap this whole thing up and jump to the other side, where we'll show just swapping out that other connector. Alright, so this is the Engineer PA09 connector pliers made in Japan. I have no idea where I bought these. I've had them for so long. So they do have a size associated with the wire diameter, but I've never had good luck trying to match those up perfectly. I always just end up going for whatever feels right. And it looks like this is probably going to be the largest one on here, maybe the second one in. So I'm going to crimp the wires, the copper first, because that's where most of the strength comes from. And these pliers, these crimpers aren't quite wide enough to do the whole crimp landing, but that looks like a pretty decent crimp. And given a little tug, it doesn't seem like it's coming apart. All right, for the insulation, see, these have a staggered tang on the insulation crimp, so you really need a super wide tool to do this in one go. You might be able to get away with something like this. One, and then come back for the second one. So that's the process. I'll make sure I have the appropriate terminals and seals, at least the ones that seem to be working for me here, down in the description. If I don't have a link, I'll at least have the part numbers there. And I'm going to run through the rest of these and go ahead and start swapping out the connector housing as I go. And then I'll make sure that we do a final fit and finish to make sure that it seats properly, and we will be done. Okay, so I got the first forward pins done, and I got some lessons learned. So because the crimper doesn't quite make these as small as they need to be, they are a little tough pushing in, but as you can see, they do fit. So there's a little ball boss. It's round and it protrudes it's on the terminal. That goes towards these tangs, the release tangs. I made the mistake on the first wire that I stuck in here, and it was upside down. So this connector housing will let you push the terminal through even if it's upside down. So make sure you pay attention and don't make the same mistake. But to get it out, I actually used my depinning pick tool and help push while putting some pressure on the wire to pull it back out, and then finally released. Another thing to note: the black cover that was on this connector, and I showed pulling off the old one. You actually don't need to remove that to put these new terminals in, but it does let you know if the terminals are deep enough into the connector housing, which is very important because these are a little bit thicker on the crimps, and it's a little bit tougher to push in here, so you don't get that satisfying click when the terminal engages the tang. So in fact, to get these in properly, I had to take my crimpers and then use the flat end as a pair of pliers essentially, and just grab it just enough pressure to push the whole wire and terminal assembly in to get past the tang, and then pulled it. And actually I didn't pull it, I pushed. I tried pulling it first, but I didn't want to take the chance of pulling out the wires, so then I just came in here and pushed the terminal down to a gauged the tang, keeping it inside the connector housing. So this housing is a little weird. It's not like the older stuff where as soon as you put the terminal in, it's basically done and you can hear it click. I'm sure if these are crimped correctly, you could hear it click, but still, this system having the ability of the terminals to go farther out is a little bit of a pain because you can't really tell when the terminal's engaged properly. But that is my lessons learned so far. All right, so I got this done. On the bottom run, I only had to replace one. See the purple right there, and on the top, basically all of them, except for that last gold pin. Now the second gold pin there that I had to replace, or gold-plated pin, it just had a little too much corrosion than I was more comfortable with, so I ended up replacing it with a new terminal. So now the next step is to make sure that our white lock here is pressed in. So this one gives a nice click to confirm that it's pressed in, and it will, just doing a visual inspection, looks like it's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's correct. And then now we'll get the black cover installed. Now the open end goes towards the white lock, and that just clicks right into place. Alright, so now I'm going to get this conduit back over the wiring. There we go. And then do a test fit. Now I don't have any dielectric grease on here yet, but I'm going to add some after I do this initial test fit. Alright, so as you push down on the connector, the arm here wants to cam up, and you can see it clicks right down into place. And it is engaged. Hell yeah. Okay, now to my melted connector here. So, looking at this guy, we've got our new one here. The symbol for the lock shows right there, pointing into that spot. So I think that looks like a little tab that can be opened up. Looks like this little tab might come out. Okay, so the lock, alright, there it is. So this face does not come off. I'm sure it actually could, but we don't need to take it off. Now, the question is, I don't know how far this lock needs to come out of the connector housing. You see it can keep going because there's no terminals in here. So, the first two terminals right there would probably be engaging in this area, so I think as long as it's about right there. So I think by default they don't come locked, so and it's probably good there. Alright, so the idea here is, you know, we're taking one wire at a time out of the old connector and putting into the new connector, and then just continuing that process until all the new all the wires are in the new housing. Now, if everything goes according to plan, there shouldn't be any damaged terminals, shouldn't be damaged wire, and we can just do a one-for-one swap. Alright, so yeah, this one looks flush. Let's see how we unlock. Alright, that was real easy. Just insert it into that hole and tilt that way, and it unlocked. Now, let's see how far we can get this guy out. That'll tell us on the other one. So this actually looks like we can pull this lock all the way out. We'll go ahead and drop that. We're going to start with pin number 1, which in this housing, it's hard to see on the old one, is this large terminal right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can see, I don't know if you can see it, but there are numbers right there on the bottom. There's one right there, I think. So, to get this harness apart, I'm gonna pull the wires out of the split loom, and then I'm gonna try to get some tension on it. Now, this is a little tricky. It's So we've got this retainer plate in the front, but this is the larger pin. It looks like the release is up top. Yep, I just felt it. Okay, so this is going to be difficult to do, given the location. Put a little bit of pressure on it. Okay. I might have to look into taking that front plate off of the connector housing, because that's a little too difficult. Let's see if we can do that. Okay. So in that motion, I just got a leverage point, pushed my deep pinning tool into the plastic, and then put some leverage on it, and it popped off. So now we have clear access to the tangs that will release the terminals. Just like that. That terminal slides out. And then we take our new connector housing, and we orient that into the same direction. Make sure that the flag's on the old terminal in the correct location, and we got a satisfying click saying that it's been seated. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these, and we will wrap this up. Okay, that's it. All the terminals have been swapped over to the new housing. So that means all the wiring repairs are done. Go ahead and do this. Oh, wait. One more thing. I almost forgot. The lock. So we got to push that in. There it is. And that nice satisfying click. Alright, so to finalize this, I'm going to actually pull this connector back off. Wrap that the end of that harness with some electrical tape, similar to the factory style where it wraps around the wire first and then this. That way I can ditch this zip tie here. And then the last little bit of wiring is the wiring for the aftermarket temp gauge, which is just out of screen. Alrighty, so this guy, it comes with the gauge with this little tiny terminal. Well, it's not as tiny as the other stuff we were working with, but it also has a little rubber cover to go over it. So if this is all you had, this will work. I'm going to actually slip some marine grade heat shrink over so that the end result here will have this rubber coat or this rubber cover and then the heat shrink over top of it, just to keep this from sliding off on the wire. And then depending on how stiff that is on this, it actually feels pretty, like it didn't just slip on. You don't want it to just slide on and off easily. You want it to have some resistance. And if it just slid on and off real easy, you could take a pair of pliers and just give a little squeeze to the sides of that, and that'll help. And you can also give a little squeeze to the top and bottom here to bend the two curls down, so it squeezes the flag here a little bit tighter. Now you don't want to go too far. Don't go ham on it. Seriously, like just a little at a time. If you ever need to adjust one of these, otherwise if it's already connected to the wire, you may have crushed it too much, and then you have to put a new one on there. So as far as routing goes, the harness, the wire is run with the harness, the transmission harness, up to the back, and where the rear O2 sensor and speed sensor comes down, that's where this wire is going to come down. I'm actually going to hug the rear transmission mount so I can zip tie it there to keep it away from the exhaust. And that means I have a little bit extra wire to work with. So I'm going to take it out of the split loom here, kind of estimate the amount of slack I want, and the curve on that. I might actually try to keep it up so it doesn't. Yeah, that's a better plan. You know what? I'm gonna want to route this so it comes down with that O2 sensor wire. And then I'm just gonna keep it as short as possible, right about there. So let's keep taking this wire out. Okay. Let's go about there. Just gonna nip that real quick. I can get my auto, well, before I do that, I'm gonna estimate about where I want to cut this nylon loom. Give that a cut, get this wire back in the loom first. We'll tape that up later. The last thing we'll do is tape it up. With the auto strippers. Now you want about an 1/8 inch, a little bit more. Now some of these terminals actually have really tall tangs to crimp a little bit thicker wire, and this is the case for this one. That wire is way too small for this size of terminal. So in this situation, you can actually get away with doubling up the wire. So I'm going to strip about the same, a little bit more, and then I'm just going to fold the wire on over itself. Now this isn't something that you would ever see in a factory situation, but we're not in a factory making cars to sell to people. We're doing this at home to repair a truck to use. So that you see, there's that copper fills in that a whole lot better. That'll get us a much better bite on the crimp when it actually crimps down into it. So before we do that though, we need to slide our heat shrink over, and then slide the rubber cover. And I'm going to put that into, I'm going to actually take this nylon loom back off momentarily to give some working space. Now I've got a ratcheting crimper for this style connector. It's from a company called LSD. It's a Chinese company. You can find these on eBay. They're everywhere. These are the 250 series. Looking for that. I'm gonna go to the, see, the middle one's probably not gonna be crimped enough, so I'm gonna go to the small one, but it may be difficult. I'll get it staged. Insert the wire. There is a depth, the appropriate depth. Just kind of wing it unless you know it. Alright, so now the terminal has been crimped, so this one was a little too small, and the terminal is now stuck inside the crimper. So if that happens, you have to work it from both ends to get it out. See, now these ratchet crimpers don't do the best in my opinion when you're dealing with smaller stuff like this. So the insulation crimp is a little sloppy, and honestly the whole crimp is a little sloppy, but it will suffice for this gauge. So, oh, that's actually nice. So this the little rubber covering here that comes with this gauge actually has a little bit of a bump out to accommodate the crimp there, and it keeps it in place. That's actually pretty nice. I like that. A lot of times the cheap terminals and those rubber covers just have they're just straight and they slide around the wire a lot. Alright, so that's about where I want the heat shrink, and it'll also, instead of tape, we'll just rely on this heat shrink to terminate the nylon there. So alright, so you gotta be real careful when you're using heat gun around this nylon split loom, especially with a heat shrink that has adhesive in it. So you need to get hot enough to melt the adhesive to bite into the conduit or the split loom. But if you go too far, it's real easy to, you'll just start melting the nylon split loom. So you see right here, I was trying to twist to get the full coverage of heat, but it was just spinning the nylon inside, and then once the glue grabbed it, it did a little twist. But that's totally fine. We see some glue coming out the other end, so that's good to go. It is a pretty decent, there's a decent tension on there. It's not too much, so I'm actually going to take the wire strippers here, just put a little bit of pressure on these. Yeah, I feel a little bit better about that. Alright, so I'm gonna grab a zip tie, get this zip tied up to up on the O2 sensor wiring harness coming down, and I'm doing it on the body harness, the part where the engine harness, not the side that goes to the sensor, so that in the future, if I ever have to mess with the sensor, I don't have to cut that zip tie. So that'll be up there, and then this guy will just kind of hang out right there. And that means all the wiring on the bottom of the truck is done. The only thing left down here, if I'm thinking correctly, it's just fluid, so making good progress.